I owe the committee an update on what the timeline will be for actual construction of the cutter.
Admiral, can I cut you off? Did you say you're working on the final design? You're supposed to have a ship in the water, and you're still working on a design?
We remain ever vigilant to preventing mass migration at sea, but balance that with the other demands on our work to include counter-narcotics. Providing a defense further from the shore than being in your own end zone is an effective strategy, and we have a multiple layered approach to doing that.
What DEI program implementations have been made in the Coast Guard within the last couple of years?
We are hiring talent as a service, the best talent that's
I don't need the bullet point, ma'am. We all know that every institution within this federal government has now been plagued by this cancer of DEI.
What countries are the most frequent countries where people are illegally trying to enter the United States?
The typical nationalities encountered at sea are Haiti and Cuba.
Admiral Fagan, the Polar Security Cutter, the heavy icebreakers. Can you give us an update on what is going on with that? And we should have had our first cutter already in the water, and we haven't even started building it yet. What's going on?
Polar Security Cutter is a critical national security asset for the nation as we create the ability to operate and generate presence in our own exclusive economic zone, in our own waters. Polar Security Cutter contract has been delayed. We're working with the shipyard. The shipyard was sold and purchased by Bollinger. It is now Bollinger, Mississippi. We're working with that shipbuilder to finalize the detailed design, begin building the cutter in earnest. We've begun some module work. I owe the committee an update on what the timeline will be for actual construction of the cutter.
Admiral, can I cut you off? Did you say you're working on the final design? You're supposed to have a ship in the water, and you're still working on a design?
We have a design. The design maturity is critical to keeping the reducing risk and onward schedule slippage and cost. So that work is—
How many years have you been designing this icebreaker?
We've been working with the yard in earnest for the past several years. The original—
What's several years? How many years have you been? It's supposed to be in the water now. You're 5 years behind, right?
We are absolutely behind.
So how many years have you been designing this cutter?
I'll have my staff come back to when we actually started that design work. We're very close to having the design maturity needed to begin to build and create certainty around cost and schedule.
With all due respect, Commandant, I've been on this committee 3 years. We've been hearing the same thing, that we're really close to design and finishing design. What is the problem? Why haven't you finished the design? You can't start building it until you have the design. What's the problem?
The original company that the bid was awarded to lost time and schedule. They did not have all of the engineers that they needed to begin to move that forward. COVID complicated that timeline. I'm confident in the shipbuilder that we have. I'm confident in where we are with regard to design maturity, and I'm confident we will begin building that ship before the end of the year, and look forward to providing more details to the committee.
So we can look forward to laying the keel before the end of December?
I don't have the exact keel laying date. I will come back to you with that, sir.
Well, this is an issue of national security. To be honest with you, to not even have the design done yet when you're supposed to have the ship in the water by now, that doesn't give us much confidence.
We both have talked about Operation Foul Anchor. Are you comfortable with where that process is right now within the Coast Guard?
With regard to Operation Foul Anchor, the legacy mishandling of sexual assaults at the Coast Guard Academy in the 80s and 90s, we continue to work with the congressionally directed IG investigation and will remain responsive. I respect the role of oversight. As we wait for the investigation to complete, we have begun action as a service. I initiated a 90-day accountability and transparency review. There were 33 directed actions. 18 of them have been completed. But more importantly, this is a journey that will continue. This is not a checklist that when it's done, we're done. This is how we will create culture intolerant of any kind of harmful behavior as a service. And I am excited about the progress we've made and welcome an opportunity to share more details.
What legal authority does the Coast Guard have to bring these perpetrators of IUU fishing to justice?
We engage in countering illegal fishing literally around the world, and in some cases we partner with ally and partner nations to allow them to exercise their own sovereignty and their own authorities in their own waters. With regard to IUU fishing in the Gulf of Mexico, we continue to engage to counter that activity and create opportunities for enforcement and consequences to breaking the law.
I've heard from constituents, from Coast Guard service members who are having a hard time finding housing in the region, and particularly in the Newport area, where they have to compete with like the vacation rental market and other factors. And I know that this is not an isolated experience. 41% of U.S. Coast Guard units are located either in remote areas without a lot of housing stock or in high vacation rental areas like in Newport. So can you talk about how the Coast Guard is managing the housing program and what we as members of Congress can do to help you in those efforts?
Thank you. Housing is obviously a challenge for the workforce as we transfer them every several years, and Newport is no exception to the challenge in finding housing. We work to exercise all of our authorities with regard to housing, and so approach it from a diversified standpoint. And where Congress can help is ensuring we've got adequate housing allowance reimbursement for the workforce so they can actually access the housing. We're working to exercise long-term leases to provide better predictability for people, and obviously rely on military bases and some of the public-private venture housing there. And I know all of those are leverages that we use both in Newport and across the country to support our personnel.
Is there information sharing going? Because this is the tricky part, and this is something that's kind of frustrating to the committee. And when we talk about cyber infrastructure, is it's very siloed. And you know, I'm a Navy guy, so obviously Army hates me for some reason. You know, but we don't. Information sharing seems to be kind of restricted. And we're trying to thread the seams. Have you engaged with your counterparts in cyber?
We absolutely engage with our DoD counterparts. I have Coast Guard personnel at U.S. Cyber Command. I have a Coast Guard Cyber Command. We lean on that training and infrastructure. Our CPTs and mission teams work right alongside our DoD counterparts. We're a member of the intelligence community, and working to share information and break down those silos is an important part of the work that's ongoing.
Looking forward, and I ask leadership to look. You need to be looking 10 to 20 years ahead of where we are today. Is there advancements that you're? Let's see here. The best way to say this is there a stall point that you're seeing in the Coast Guard when it comes to cyber build out that the ask, the want? Because the committee itself understands the importance in the development of cybersecurity and what that does for our operational, strategic, and tactical advantages. Is there something that is kind of pinging hard on your radar?
We've been making these investments in cyber expertise. We've stood up a cyber rating, a cyber specialty within the organization.
When, as far as our waterway footprint and the amount of immigration we see coming across the waters, and forgive me for lack of a better term, but Coast Guard is responsible for the policing of the global waterways. Is that overwhelming the system?
Is the question specifically related to
is the
maritime
amount is the draw to when we have the Cuban immigrants that are coming across the waterways, the Haitians that are coming across? It seems like we have to migrate a lot of effort into that particular spot. Are we losing effort elsewhere because we're having to focus in on that?
The Coast Guard views our maritime migration work. It is life-saving work as people make desperate attempts to illegally migrate to the country. 2 years ago, we're seeing large numbers of migrant flows across all of the maritime vectors, moved assets, created increased presence. More recently this year, those flows have been down significantly, which frees assets. We still have them postured in those vectors. We use unmanned systems as well as actual Coast Guard ships to create that presence, but we remain ever vigilant to preventing mass migration at sea, but balance that with the other demands on our work to include counter-narcotics.
It was astounding to find out as far out into the Caribbean area as Turks and Caicos that there was a patrol element and that we were spending so many resources in that area. What is the footprint, you know, just, I guess, Turks and Caicos in the Puerto Rico area, what does that footprint look like in that Turks and Caicos region? And the reason why I'm asking this question, I am concerned that maybe we are providing services, and I can tell you from meeting with the leaders of that country, that I think probably is taken for granted. I can absolutely tell you that by meeting with their leadership, their governor, the AG. I don't think that they understand in terms of just how they benefit from the American taxpayer. Are we spending too much time and resources there where some of those assignments could be moved closer to the Florida area?
We have Coast Guard assets deployed into the maritime vectors where we historically see maritime migration to ensure that we prevent those illegal migrant attempts into the United States. You asked specifically about Puerto Rico. We have Coast Guard assets based in Puerto Rico, both fast response cutters and people at stations as well as an air station to create that presence that is critical to deterring those illegal effects. Much of the work we do, it's not just the Coast Guard, it's interagency work, and we do work with allies and partner nations as we look to mitigate and prevent illegal migration attempts.
But in regards to the amount of assignment that's that far away from the mainland, my question is, are we being as efficient as we could be? If I have a reason to play defense, there's a reason why you have post in the game of basketball, because you kind of concentrate manpower closer to where the goal is. You know, for the goal for illegal immigration is get access to the mainland. My question is, are we sending so much personnel, equipment, time spent so far, thousands of miles off the mainland coast, that your recruitment numbers are down, that maybe we'd be better spent focusing closer to our mainland?
I'm happy to have staff come over and walk through the complexity of how we play, how we create that deterrent effect in going, providing a defense further from the shore than being in your own end zone is an effective strategy, and we have a multiple layered approach to doing that. The Coast Guard men and women that do this work, they understand the work, they enjoy the work, they take meaning and value from the work, and again, it is critical to our national security as we work to create Homeland security.
Why do you think you guys are failing to hit your numbers right now?
It was a combination of capacity, and we've reinvested in that capacity. We are not always understood by the totality of the American people, so beginning to increase awareness and understanding of who we are as a Coast Guard. And just as the shipyards are looking for workforce, we're competing with employers and other militaries, across the country for workforce. And young people have had some feelings with regard to work, and all of that has come together to make it a challenge.
Yeah, thank you, Admiral. What additional workload has been put on the Coast Guard and our sailors, because we have a commander-in-chief who signaled to the rest of the entire world that we're about to throw our southern border wide open? And I know that you have to be careful in how you answer that. I'll make that claim because I know I'm able to watch cause and effect, and I'm not in your position. I don't wear your uniform, and that's not my chain of command. But with the policy changes of this federal government over the last couple of years, what additional workload has that put on your workforce, Admiral?
We view our role in preventing and interdicting migrants at sea as critical life-saving work, and we continue to ensure that we've got presence that's needed to prevent.
Ma'am, real quick, that's not what I asked you. I know that that's a part of what you guys have to do, and it does absorb resources. I'm asking you to give us an understanding of how much of an additional workload that's put on your resources, your infrastructure, your personnel because of the policy. Can you even give me a percentage?
Certainly happy to come over. We can walk you through all of the flows of migrants over the last several years. This year and today.
Has there been any study to calculate the additional man hours?
I can share with you the ebb and flow of man hours and resources that we've put into the migrant.
But you don't know it off the top of your head, Admiral?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't, because those resources also do other missions as we have them at sea. But happy to work with your staff and give you more specifics.
What DEI program implementations have been made in the Coast Guard within the last couple of years?
We are hiring talent as a service, the best talent that's
I don't need the bullet point, ma'am. We all know that every institution within this federal government has now been plagued by this cancer of DEI. Instead of hiring people based on their merit alone, I'm asking you what programs have been implemented within the last couple of years that focus solely on diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I'll have the staff give you, we value diversity, but the talent.
Ma'am, we've always valued diversity in this country, but we all know that we used to have a system that was more based on merit. I'm asking you specific questions about what specific programs have been implemented under your watch within the last couple of years that focus on DEI.
I'll have the staff work with your staff. I can't immediately say this program initiated in the last 2 years. Again, the programs all focus on ensuring workforce that meets the standards is able to serve honorably in the service, and that we hire a workforce that meets our standards.
What is the concept for conducting maintenance on forward operating cutters moving forward?
So we continue to look at how we support cutters forward. When the large cutters are over in theater, they're under the operational control of our DoD counterparts, and we rely on them for logistics supports. The fast response cutters have been fielded into the region. We've got several in Guam, and we continue to look at innovative ways to ensure we've got the right maintenance and support for cutters as they're forward deployed.
In February 2024, the Coast Guard issued a notice proposing an update to its maritime security regulations by adding regulations specifically focused on establishing minimum cybersecurity requirements for U.S. flagged vessels and ports. Admiral, please explain why the Coast Guard believes such a rule change is necessary.
Cyber and cybersecurity is as critical to our infrastructure resiliency and readiness as hardware and infrastructure. We've invested in our own cyber force expertise, and now the intent of the rulemaking is to ensure that we've got the right clarity around standards for vessels and facilities. We issued a notice of proposed rulemaking, opened a comment period. That comment period is now closed. We've had over 400 comments. We're listening to what was said and are working to work that rule forward so that it creates increased resiliency around cyber in our critical maritime port infrastructure.
On average, how many illegal aliens does the Coast Guard interdict in a year?
The number of interdictions that we encounter at sea has varied significantly year to year. This year to date, the numbers have been quite low in comparison to previous years. Happy to have the staff come over and walk you through 3 to 5 years worth of maritime migration interdiction numbers.
What countries are the most frequent countries where people are illegally trying to enter the United States?
I'll speak to the maritime migration flows. The typical nationalities encountered at sea are Haiti and Cuba. There are some onesie, twosies, and again, can walk through all that, but primarily at sea, it's Haiti and Haitians and Cubans.
How has extreme weather fueled by climate change impacted the Coast Guard's operation?
We are obviously deployed or employed along the coastline, and so as weather events and flooding events intensify, it impacts our infrastructure. As we've rebuilt post-hurricanes in previous years, we moved to rebuild that infrastructure so it's resilient to those kinds of impacts from climate change. Our role as a first responder, disaster responder, leader in disaster, we continue to hone those skills, and you know, I'm certain whether it was the Francis Scott Key Bridge or Beryl or the next disaster that Coast Guard people will be there and ready to lead and support the nation.
I think back to my time in the military where we had mandatory training, and some of that mandatory training I thought was appropriate as a Master Chief. Sometimes I thought it was busy work, parts of it was busy work, and then some of it I thought took us away from doing our job. So the question for you is, how many hours of mandatory DEI training do Coast Guardsmen have?
We have a number of mandated general military training requirements. I don't know of a standalone course. We'd have to look into each of those to understand, is there a D&I component?
If a cadet was found severely liable for sexually abusing and defaming a woman, would that violate the Coast Guard's code of conduct?
The fouled anchor investigation revealed to us inadequate handling and investigation of sexual assaults reported by cadets in the 80s and 90s at the Coast Guard Academy. One assault is one assault too many, and we are not the same organization today that we were then when we failed to create the appropriate environment for reports of sexual assault. The standard at the Coast Guard Academy is the same standard that we have in the service, and that is that we will not tolerate sexual assault, harassment, retaliation, retribution, hazing, bullying. And growing a culture that's fully intolerant of that change, where people have the courage to act, to report, and that there's trust in the system, is the work that we're doing.
Without objection, this committee stands adjourned.